The radio crackled to life at exactly 6:47 a.m., just as it had every morning for the past 3 weeks, and Marcus Wellington nearly dropped his scavenged can of beans when he heard it. The voice was different this time. Not the automated emergency broadcast system that had looped endlessly since the fall, but an actual human being, breathing and alive somewhere in the wasteland that Denver had become. Marcus pressed himself against the cold wall of the pharmacy he'd been hiding in, his heart hammering against his ribs as he turned up the volume on the small transistor radio he'd found in an abandoned car 2 days prior. "This is Rebecca Torres, broadcasting from somewhere in the metropolitan area." The woman's voice trembled slightly, professional training barely masking her fear. "If anyone can hear this, if anyone is still out there and still human, I'm transmitting on multiple frequencies. I'm a former radio host from station 98.7, and I've managed to get the emergency generator running at our broadcast tower. I don't know how long I can maintain this signal, but I need you to know that you're not alone." Marcus felt something he hadn't experienced in months, something he'd almost forgotten existed in this new world of shambling corpses and endless silence. Hope. It bloomed in his chest like a fragile flower pushing through concrete. His hands shook as he pulled out the tattered map from his backpack, trying to remember where the radio station towers were located. The infection had swept through Denver like wildfire 6 months ago, turning neighbor against neighbor, reducing the city of lights to a tomb of darkness and moaning shadows that had once been people. Rebecca's voice continued, "I'm going to broadcast every morning at this time. I'm also going to leave my location at the end of this message for anyone brave enough or desperate enough to try to find me. But please be careful. They're getting smarter. I've been watching them from up here and I'm telling you something is changing. They're starting to move in coordinated groups, almost like they're hunting." A cold shiver ran down Marcus's spine. He'd noticed it too during his supply runs through the downtown area. The infected, the ones the government had clinically called necrosymptomatic humans before all the clinical terms stopped matching, were evolving. Last week, he'd watched from a rooftop as a group of 15 infected had worked together to break through a reinforced door, taking turns throwing their bodies against it with what almost seemed like strategy. It was the stuff of nightmares, watching the dead learn to think again. "I've also picked up 2 other survivors on the emergency channels," Rebecca said, and Marcus leaned closer to the radio, hardly daring to breathe. "Someone calling themselves Jackson near the old stadium, and another person who wouldn't give their name but claimed to have supplies and medical training holed up in the university district. If you're hearing this, if either of you are listening, maybe we can find a way to connect. Maybe we can figure out how to actually survive this, not just hide and wait to die." The broadcast began to break up with static, and Marcus frantically adjusted the antenna, desperate not to lose the signal. Through the interference, he could hear Rebecca reading off coordinates and landmarks. He grabbed a pencil stub from his pocket and scribbled the information on the margin of his map, his hand cramping with urgency. The radio tower, she was at the radio tower on the eastern edge of the city, the one near the old industrial park. "Tomorrow, same time," Rebecca's voice cut through one final time before dissolving into white noise. "Stay alive out there. Please just stay alive." The radio went dead, and Marcus was left in the suffocating silence of the pharmacy once more, surrounded by empty shelves and the faint smell of decay that permeated everything now. Through the dusty window, he could see the sun rising over the abandoned city, casting long shadows across streets where nothing living walked anymore. Somewhere in the distance, he heard it, the sound that had become the soundtrack to the end of the world, the low, collective moan of the infected horde, hungry and endless. Marcus looked down at the coordinates on his map, then at the baseball bat wrapped in duct tape leaning against the wall beside him. The radio tower was 12 miles away through the heart of downtown, through the densest concentration of infected in the entire metropolitan area. It might as well have been 12,000 miles. But Rebecca's voice had awakened something in him he thought had died along with civilization. If there were others out there, if there was even a chance of finding other living souls, he had to try. The question was whether he'd survive long enough to reach them. Marcus waited until exactly 9:15 a.m. before making his move, having spent the last 2 hours watching the street patterns of the infected through a crack in the pharmacy's boarded window. He'd learned their rhythms over the months, the way they moved in waves like a grotesque tide, clustering and dispersing according to rules he didn't fully understand. The morning hours usually saw them at their slowest, their decomposing bodies sluggish from the cold Denver night, but today something felt different. The groups were larger, more concentrated, and they seemed to be lingering near intersections as if waiting for something or someone. He'd packed light because speed mattered more than supplies in the dead zones. His backpack contained 3 bottles of water, 2 cans of food, a first aid kit he prayed he wouldn't need, and the precious radio wrapped carefully in a spare shirt. The baseball bat hung from a loop on his belt, and he'd strapped a hunting knife to his calf, taken from a sporting goods store 3 weeks back when he'd still believed he might make it to the rumored safe zones in the mountains. Those rumors had died along with the last military helicopter he'd seen crash into the financial district, its burning wreckage a funeral pyre for the hope of government rescue. The door creaked as he eased it open, the sound impossibly loud in the morgue-like silence of the morning. Marcus froze, every muscle tensed, waiting to see if the noise had attracted attention. 30 seconds passed, then a minute, and nothing emerged from the shadows. He slipped into the street, keeping close to the building walls, moving with the careful deliberation of a man who understood that one mistake meant joining the ranks of the shambling dead. The asphalt was cracked and littered with abandoned vehicles, their doors hanging open like broken jaws, rust and dried blood painting abstract patterns across their hoods. 3 blocks in, Marcus heard the scream. It was high-pitched and terrified, unmistakably human, and it came from somewhere to his left, deeper into the residential area he'd been planning to avoid. Every instinct told him to keep moving, to maintain his course toward the radio tower, to remember that in this new world, stopping to help someone else was usually just a faster way to die. But the scream came again, desperate and pleading, and Marcus found his feet changing direction before his brain had fully committed to the decision. Maybe it was Rebecca's broadcast that had done it, that reminder that humanity meant more than just surviving, or maybe he was simply tired of being alone with only the dead for company. He found her trapped on top of a minivan, a young woman maybe 25 years old with dark hair plastered to her face with sweat and terror written across her features. Below her, 6 infected clawed at the vehicle's sides, their fingers leaving streaks in the dirt and grime that coated the metal. The woman clutched a tire iron in her shaking hands, and Marcus could see she'd already used it from the way one of the infected had a caved-in skull that hadn't quite stopped it from trying to reach her. She locked eyes with Marcus across the distance, and he saw the exact moment hope and fear collided in her expression. Marcus didn't give himself time to think about the odds or calculate the risk. He grabbed a chunk of concrete from the rubble-strewn sidewalk and hurled it with all his strength at a storefront window 2 houses down. The glass exploded with a magnificent crash that echoed through the empty streets like a dinner bell. The effect was immediate and terrifying. The 6 infected around the minivan jerked their heads toward the sound in perfect unison, that coordinated movement Rebecca had warned about, and then they were shambling toward the noise with disturbing purpose. But they weren't alone. From doorways and alleys, from behind cars and out of collapsed buildings, more infected emerged, drawn by the sound, at least 20 of them converging on the area. "Run. Now!" Marcus shouted at the woman, and she didn't hesitate. She leaped from the minivan and sprinted toward him with the desperate speed of someone who'd been given an unexpected second chance at life. Marcus turned and ran too, his boots pounding the pavement, the woman's ragged breathing close behind him. The moaning started then, that collective sound of hunger that meant they'd been seen, that meant the infected were no longer following random noise but actual prey. Marcus grabbed the woman's hand as they rounded a corner, pulling her into a narrow alley he'd scouted weeks ago, a passage too tight for large groups to follow efficiently. Behind them, the moaning grew louder, and he realized with growing horror that this rescue might have just killed them both. The alley was narrower than Marcus remembered, or perhaps fear had distorted his memory, making the space seem wider and safer than the claustrophobic corridor of brick and garbage they now found themselves racing through. The woman stumbled over a fallen trash can, and Marcus caught her before she could go down, his grip tight on her arm as he hauled her forward. Behind them, the infected poured into the alley entrance, their bodies creating a bottleneck that slowed but didn't stop their pursuit. The sound of their collective hunger echoed off the walls, amplified into something that seemed to come from everywhere at once. "There's a fire escape 20 feet ahead on the right," Marcus gasped out, his lungs burning from the sprint. He'd used it before during a supply run that had gone wrong, and he prayed it was still intact, still climbable. The woman nodded, too breathless to speak, her knuckles white around the tire iron she'd refused to drop. They reached the rusted ladder, and Marcus practically threw her at it. "Climb. Don't look back, just climb." She went up with the frantic energy of pure survival instinct, and Marcus followed, his boots slipping on rungs slick with morning dew and years of neglect. Below, the first of the infected reached the ladder and grabbed at his feet with hands that had once belonged to someone's neighbor, someone's friend, someone's family. Marcus kicked hard, feeling his boot connect with rotted flesh and brittle bone, and pulled himself up just as more infected clustered below, piling on top of each other in their desperation to reach living flesh. The fire escape groaned under their combined weight, metal shrieking in protest. "It's not going to hold them," the woman shouted from above. She'd reached the second-floor landing and was already working on the window, trying to force it open. Marcus scrambled up to join her, adding his strength to hers, and the old window finally gave way with a crack of splintering wood. They tumbled inside just as the fire escape began to tear away from the building, the sound of rending metal mixing with the frustrated moans of the infected as their pathway collapsed into the alley below. For a long moment, Marcus and the woman lay on the floor of what appeared to be an abandoned apartment, chests heaving, neither able to speak. The room was dim, lit only by the weak sunlight filtering through grimy windows, and it smelled of dust and abandonment rather than death, which meant it had likely been empty even before the infection spread. Marcus finally sat up, checking himself for bites or scratches, the ritual that had become as automatic as breathing. Cling. He looked at the woman, who was doing the same inspection with shaking hands. "Thank you," she finally managed, her voice hoarse. "I thought I was dead. I thought that was it." She met his eyes, and he saw intelligence there alongside the fear, a sharpness that suggested she'd survived this long for good reasons. "I'm Amanda Price. I was a paramedic before everything went to hell." "Marcus Wellington," he replied, the social nicety of introductions feeling absurd and necessary in equal measure. "I'm heading to the radio tower on the east side. There's a woman broadcasting, says she's looking for survivors. You hear it?" Amanda's eyes widened. "Rebecca Torres?" "Yes, I heard it this morning. That's why I was out there. I was trying to reach her too, but I got cornered when a whole group of them came out of nowhere. It was like they were hurting me." She stood up, brushing dirt from her jeans, and Marcus noticed the medical bag attached to her belt, worn but intact. "We should team up. 2 people have better odds than 1, and if you're military or law enforcement, we'd complement each other well." "I'm not," Marcus admitted, standing as well. "I was an architect. Designed office buildings and shopping centers. Real useful skill set for the apocalypse." The bitter humor felt good, a reminder that he was still human enough to joke. "But I've learned fast. I know the streets, I know their patterns, and I've made it this far." "An architect and a paramedic," Amanda said, and incredibly she smiled, just a small quirk of her lips that seemed like an act of defiance against the horror surrounding them. "Well, at least if we find shelter, you can tell me if it's structurally sound, and when you inevitably hurt yourself doing something stupid, I can patch you up." Marcus found himself smiling back, then the moment was shattered by a sound that froze his blood. A voice, human but wrong, calling from somewhere in the building below them. Not a moan but actual words, slurred and broken. "Come down. Remember, come down." Amanda's face went pale. "Tell me I didn't just hear that. Tell me they can't talk now." Marcus moved to the window, carefully peering down into the alley where the infected had gathered. One of them stood at the front, a man in the tattered remains of a business suit, his head tilted up toward their window. The infected man's mouth worked slowly, painfully forming words that should have been impossible. "Food here. Come down." The nightmare, Marcus realized with creeping dread, had just evolved again. Marcus and Amanda backed away from the window in synchronized horror, their eyes locked on each other as the impossible truth settled over them like a suffocating blanket. The infected weren't supposed to talk, weren't supposed to remember language or form coherent thoughts beyond the base hunger that drove them. Every piece of information from the military broadcasts before the communications went dark had insisted the infection destroyed higher brain function, reducing victims to primitive hunting instincts and nothing more. But the ragged voice from the alley below proved that intelligence, however damaged and twisted, was returning to the dead. "We need to move now," Marcus whispered, grabbing his backpack and moving toward the apartment door. Amanda followed close behind, her paramedic training evident in how she moved, checking corners and maintaining situational awareness despite the fear he could see trembling in her hands. The apartment opened onto a hallway thick with darkness, and Marcus pulled out his flashlight, keeping the beam low and pointed at the floor to avoid drawing attention through any windows. The building was a typical 3-story residential complex, the kind that had once housed young professionals and small families, and now served as just another tomb in the sprawling graveyard that Denver had become. They made it down the hallway to the stairwell when they heard it, footsteps below them, but not the dragging shuffle of the infected. These were purposeful, human, and climbing fast. Marcus raised his bat, positioning himself in front of Amanda, but a voice called up from the darkness, urgent and very much alive. Don't swing, I'm human, I'm alive. A figure emerged into the weak light filtering down from above, a tall man in his early 40s wearing tactical gear that had seen better days, a crossbow held carefully in non-threatening position. His dark skin was marked with scars, and his eyes held the particular exhaustion that came from too many days without real sleep. I heard the commotion outside, saw you two go in. Name's Jackson Brooks, former Marine, and before you ask, yes, I'm the Jackson from the emergency channels that Rebecca mentioned in her broadcast. Amanda lowered her tire iron slightly but didn't fully relax. You were at the stadium? Was being the operative word, Jackson replied, moving up the stairs slowly, keeping his movements visible and non-threatening. The infected breached my position last night. Same thing you just saw, coordinated attack, and one of them kept making sounds like it was directing the others. I barely got out alive. Been moving since then, heard Rebecca's broadcast this morning on a radio I scavenged. I'm heading to the tower, figured it's the only play left. He glanced between them, assessing. You two heading the same direction? Marcus made a quick decision, the kind that you made in the apocalypse when overthinking could get you killed. Yeah, we are. Safety in numbers, right? But we need to move fast. The ones below are learning, adapting. One of them just spoke actual words to us. Jackson's expression darkened. I was afraid of that. At the stadium, I started documenting their behavior. They're not just moving in groups, they're problem-solving. I saw them use a battering ram, an actual car axle they must have pulled from a vehicle, to break through my barricade. Whatever this infection is, it's not permanent brain death. Something's coming back online up there. He tapped his head. Wrong and twisted, but definitely cognitive function. The three of them made their way down the stairwell, moving as a unit now, their weapons ready but their posture suggesting cooperation rather than competition. In the old world, three strangers thrown together would have needed time to build trust, to establish rapport and boundaries. But the apocalypse had a way of accelerating relationships, stripping away the social niceties and leaving only the essential question. Could you trust this person to watch your back when the dead came calling? They emerged into the building's lobby, and Jackson held up a fist, the universal military signal for stop. Through the grimy glass doors, they could see the street beyond, and what Marcus saw made his stomach drop. The infected weren't wandering randomly anymore. They were standing in formation, roughly 24 of them, spread across the intersection in what looked almost like a perimeter. In the center stood the talking infected from the alley, the one in the business suit, and as Marcus watched, it raised one decomposing arm and pointed directly at the lobby doors. Trap, Jackson breathed. They knew we'd come down. They were waiting. The infected began to move forward as one, and somewhere in the distance, Marcus heard more moans answering the call, a sound like a tsunami of death rolling toward them through the empty streets. The radio tower was still 8 miles away, and between them and safety stood an army of the dead that had learned to think. Amanda was the one who spotted their salvation, her paramedic's eye for detail catching what Marcus and Jackson had missed in their focus on the approaching horde. The basement, she said urgently, pointing to a door beneath the stairwell marked Maintenance, Authorized Personnel Only. Old buildings like this in Denver, they're all connected through underground service tunnels. The whole block shares utility access. I know because I responded to a call once where a maintenance worker got lost in them. Jackson didn't hesitate. He fired his crossbow through the lobby door, the bolt catching the lead infected, the one in the business suit, directly in the skull. The thing went down, but 3 more immediately moved forward to take its place, and Marcus realized with chilling certainty that they had a hierarchy now, a chain of command among the dead. Go, go! Jackson shouted, already reloading. I'll cover the door. Marcus grabbed Amanda's hand and they sprinted for the maintenance door. It was locked, but the bat made short work of the handle, the metal giving way with a satisfying crack. Beyond lay darkness and a set of concrete stairs descending into the earth. The smell that wafted up was stale air and mildew, but blessedly free of the sweet rot scent of the infected. Jackson backed toward them, his crossbow trained on the lobby doors as the infected pressed against the glass, their combined weight beginning to crack the already weakened barrier. Move! Marcus called, and Jackson turned and dove through the maintenance door just as the lobby glass shattered inward. They slammed the heavy door shut, and Marcus wedged the broken handle through the interior hinges, creating a makeshift barricade. The pounding started immediately, a rhythmic hammering that suggested purpose and determination rather than mindless fury. Amanda was already descending the stairs, her own flashlight now activated, and Marcus and Jackson followed, plunging into the underground darkness of Denver's forgotten infrastructure. The tunnel system was exactly as Amanda had described, A maze of concrete passages lined with pipes and electrical conduits, junction boxes covered in decades of dust, and the occasional rusted utility cart abandoned by workers who would never return to claim them. Water dripped somewhere in the distance, a steady percussion that echoed off the walls. Marcus pulled out his map, trying to orient himself in the subterranean network, but the tunnels weren't marked on any standard city map. "We need to head east," he said, studying the compass on his watch. "If we can find a tunnel running parallel to Colfax Avenue, it should take us at least halfway to the radio tower district without exposing us to the surface." "Assuming these tunnels are still passable," Jackson added, sweeping his flashlight across a junction where 3 passages met. "And assuming the infected haven't figured out how to get down here." As if summoning his fear into reality, they heard it then, distant but unmistakable, the sound of the maintenance door above finally giving way, and the subsequent groans echoing down the stairwell behind them. "They're coming down," Amanda whispered, her face pale in the flashlight glow. "We can't outrun them in the dark. We don't know where we're going and they don't need light to hunt." Marcus made a decision born of desperation and the architectural knowledge he'd once used to design buildings that would never be built. "We don't outrun them. We outsmart them. These tunnels have multiple junctions, branch points. We split up at each intersection, make noise down different paths, confuse their tracking. Then we regroup further ahead." He looked at Jackson. "You have military training, you know tactical dispersal and rally points?" Jackson nodded slowly. "Risky as hell, but it might work. We pick a destination, somewhere distinctive we can all identify even in the dark, and we each take different routes to get there." He studied the tunnel ahead, his tactical mind already calculating. "There, look at the pipes overhead. Red pipes are steam heat, they run to major buildings. We follow the red pipes east, they'll converge at a central heating plant. That's our rally point." They split up at the next junction, Marcus taking the center passage, Amanda going left and Jackson moving right. The sound of the infected entering the tunnel system grew louder, that chorus of moans now mixed with the shuffling echo of many feet on concrete. Marcus ran through the darkness, one hand on the wall for guidance, his flashlight off to avoid giving away his position. He could hear them behind him, closer than he'd like, but also heard them splitting up, drawn by the sounds Amanda and Jackson were making in the parallel tunnels. The red pipes led him deeper into the earth, further from the surface world and the morning sun, into a darkness where the line between the living and the dead had become terrifyingly thin. Somewhere ahead, a light flickered, and Marcus heard something that made his heart race with equal parts hope and dread. Machinery running and a voice calling out, cautious but human, asking who was there in the dark. The voice belonged to a woman in her 60s, her silver hair pulled back in a practical bun, wearing a lab coat over worn jeans and holding a wrench like a weapon. She stood in the doorway of what appeared to be an old maintenance station, generator lights humming behind her, casting her in a warm glow that seemed impossible in the darkness of the tunnels. "I'm Dr. Elizabeth Hayes," she said, lowering the wrench slightly as she took in Marcus's haggard appearance. "University of Denver, Microbiology Department. I'm the one who wouldn't give her name on the emergency channels. I've been working down here since the outbreak, trying to understand what we're dealing with." Marcus nearly collapsed with relief. "There are 2 others with me, we split up to avoid the infected. They're following the red pipes, same as me." As if summoned by his words, Amanda emerged from a tunnel to the left, bleeding from a cut on her forehead but alive and moving. 30 seconds later, Jackson appeared from the right passage, his crossbow missing but a fire axe now gripped in his hands. "They're right behind me," Jackson gasped. "Maybe 20 of them moving fast. Whatever advantage we had, it's gone." Dr. Hayes didn't panic. Instead, she moved with the calm efficiency of someone who'd been preparing for exactly this scenario. "Inside now. I have a theory I need to test, and if I'm right, we might have a chance." She ushered them into the maintenance station, a surprisingly spacious room filled with computer equipment jury-rigged to the emergency generator, monitors showing what looked like microscope imagery and data charts. "The infection doesn't destroy the brain," she explained rapidly, pulling up files on her screen. "It rewires it, uses the neural pathways that already exist. The victims retain memory, problem-solving ability, even language, but it's all filtered through an overwhelming drive to spread the contagion." "That's fascinating, Doc, but they're about 30 seconds from breaking down that door," Jackson said, already moving to barricade the entrance. "I know, and I'm counting on it." Elizabeth pulled out a strange device, something that looked like a modified radio transmitter attached to a laptop. "I've been broadcasting on frequencies the human ear can't detect, using the emergency station infrastructure. Specific tones that interact with the infection's effect on the auditory cortex. I think I can overload their sensory processing, essentially stunning them long enough for us to escape. The pounding on the door began, and through the small window Marcus could see them, dozens of infected now, their faces pressed against the reinforced glass. But among them he noticed something that made his blood run cold. They weren't all attacking. Some stood back, watching, learning as the stronger ones worked to breach the entrance. Evolution happening in real time. Whatever you're going to do, do it now. Amanda shouted, adding her weight to the barricade. Elizabeth activated her device, and the effect was immediate and horrifying. The infected outside began to convulse, their bodies seizing as the inaudible frequency overwhelmed their rewired nervous systems. They collapsed en masse, not dead but incapacitated, twitching on the concrete floor. It won't last long, Elizabeth warned. Maybe 5 minutes before they adapt. There's a service exit that leads to the surface 300 yards east. It opens near the industrial park. Near the radio tower, Marcus breathed, pulling out his map. They were closer than he'd dared hope. They ran through the tunnels as Elizabeth's device bought them precious time, emerging into the late morning sun through a maintenance hatch that opened onto a stretch of abandoned factories. In the distance, rising above the urban decay like a monument to the world that was, stood the radio transmission tower. And at its base, visible through binoculars Jackson produced from his tactical vest, was a figure waving a bright orange flag. Rebecca Torres was real, alive and waiting. The 4 survivors moved toward the tower, weapons ready, knowing that the infected behind them would recover and resume the hunt. But something had changed during their journey through the darkness. They were no longer alone. They had found each other, found hope, found purpose beyond mere survival. Dr. Hayes carried research that might lead to understanding the infection. Amanda brought medical expertise. Jackson offered tactical knowledge and protection. Marcus, the architect who designed buildings for a world that no longer existed, now understood his role was to help design something new, a framework for rebuilding humanity from the ashes. As they reached the tower's base and Rebecca Torres emerged to meet them, her radio equipment visible through the door behind her, Marcus allowed himself something he hadn't felt since the world ended. Not just hope but belief. Belief that voices in the empty streets could find each other. Belief that even in a world of the walking dead, humanity could survive, adapt, and perhaps one day thrive again. The apocalypse wasn't over. The infected were evolving, becoming smarter and more dangerous with each passing day. But now, the living were evolving too, finding strength in unity, purpose in survival, and in the voices that refused to be silenced by the darkness, the promise of a future worth fighting for. Behind them, the moans began again, the hunt resuming. Ahead, the tower doors opened wider, revealing supplies, equipment, and the possibility of sanctuary. The journey was far from over, but they would face it together, voices joined against the silence, human against the emptiness, fighting for every new dawn. The end.